This is section 2.4. When you're answering in WebAssign tonight, you guys need to write your answer in standard form, meaning the real number comes first, the imaginary number comes second. Okay? When we have an imaginary number, guys, it's because there is a negative sign underneath the radical. When you take that negative out, it becomes an I, which means imaginary. So if I have the square root of -9, I would rewrite that as the square root of -1 times the square root of 9. The square root of -1 is I, and the square root of 9 is 3. So the square root of -9 is 3I. All right? Uh-huh. Okay, so the real part is your A, real part. The BI is your imaginary part. Okay, it's called a complex number because there's two things. Okay, this is combining like terms. So I have to say it again because I forgot to hit record. We are simply combining like terms. Back to our complex numbers. So the real part goes first, the imaginary part second. So I'm going to say, there's a plus sign in the middle, that just means combine. What is 3 plus 2?
5.
5. And what's a negative I plus 3I?
2I.
Plus 2I. That's it. Literally, that's it. And the second one, if I have a negative sign, if I'm subtracting, what do I have to do with this negative sign before I can combine like terms?
Distribute it.
I have to distribute it. So this becomes negative 2I. So if I combine like terms, 1 minus 4 is?
Negative 3.
Negative 3. And then 2I minus 2I?
0.
If you wanted to write negative 3 plus 0I, you're welcome to, because that's written as a complex number. Okay, look at the next one. There's a little extra we got to do here. There's a -1 in front of here. So what do I have to do before I can start combining all my like terms?
Distribute the negative.
I got to distribute this negative. So this becomes positive 2, and this becomes negative 3I, right?
Mm-hmm.
So 3 plus 2. 3 plus 2 is?
5.
5.
Okay, 3 plus 2 is 5. Minus 5 is?
0.
So they all cancel out. And then what's negative 3I and a positive 1?
Negative 2.
Negative 2I. I could also write that as 0 minus 2I. Same thing. Questions? Talk to me.
2 minus... Wait. Yeah, 2 minus 5 is not 0, right?
Okay, so let's do it again. I'll write it out so you guys can see it. If I distribute this negative sign, correct? I have 3. If I distribute this negative, it becomes what? This negative 2 becomes what? Okay, so plus 2. Then this becomes what?
Negative 3I.
Negative 3I. And then I have plus negative 5 plus I. So combine your like terms. 3.
Where did you get the 3 from?
So if I combine like terms, 3 plus 2 is what?
5.
And then 5 minus 5 is?
0.
0. Then I have negative 3I plus I gives me negative 3 plus 1.
Negative 2I.
Negative 2I. That can also be written as 0 minus 2I. I'm not sure how WebAssign's going to want it. So this is written as a complex number with the real part first, the imaginary part second. So if you put it in this way and it tells you it's wrong, try something else. Now if I look at D, okay, what do I have to do first before I can combine all my like terms?
Distribute the
Distribute
negative.
the negative, okay? So if I'm going to rewrite this, 3 plus 2I stays the same, plus 4 minus I. This becomes minus 7 minus I. Is everybody with me? Okay, real parts.
Yeah.
3 plus 4 minus 7. What is 3 plus 4?
7.
Minus 7 gives me,
0.
okay. What is 2 minus I
I.
minus I?
0. 0 I.
0 I.
I'm not sure how WebAssign is going to want it. They may want it written as a complex, or they may want it just 0. I'm not sure, so like I said, put it in, try a couple different ways. Questions?
Yeah.
All right, now we're going to talk about multiplying. What we need to remember here, what is the value, guys, of I squared? You remember?
Negative 1.
-1. Good. So I squared equals -1. That is a major thing you have to remember. I'm going to go over this a million times, I promise, to get this in your brain. But the value of I squared is -1. So this 5 on the outside here means to distribute. That's it. What is 5 times -2?
Negative
5.
10.
-10. What is 5 times 3i?
15 I.
That's it. Your answer always needs to be written with the real part first, the imaginary part second. If the I and the 2 were switched, you still do the same multiplication, just rewrite it so it says -10 plus 15i. All right, in letter B, we're going to FOIL. That's it. 2 times 4 is
8.
8. 2 times 3i is
6 I.
6i. Negative I times 4 is
Negative 4 I.
negative 4i. Negative I times positive 3i is
Negative
Positive 3.
negative 3i squared. The first thing I would do, guys, I understand some of you see that. I would write it out. As soon as I see I squared, I'm going to cross it out and change the sign in front of that number. Because if I have a -3 and then I squared is the same as -1, right? -3 and -1 gives me positive 3. So whenever you see an I squared, you can cross the I squared out and change the sign in front. And when you do that, you'll be able to combine real parts with imaginary parts. 8 plus 3 is how much?
11.
11. 6i minus 4i is what?
2I.
Plus 2i. And that's it. When we FOIL, 3 times 3 is
Isn't that just
9.
perfect square?
3 times -2i is -6i. 2i times 3 is plus 6i. 2i times -2i is -4i squared. What I tell you to do with the I squared?
Change it to positive.
Cross it off.
Cross out the
Change the sign in front. So now deal with the reals. What is 9 plus 4?
13.
13. And what happens with a -6i and a positive 6i?
They cancel.
They cancel out. So you're left with 13. Or it could be written as 13 plus 0i. I'm not sure exactly, again, how WebAssign wants it, so just pay attention. All right, in letter D, 4i times -1, -4i, correct? 4i
Yeah.
times 5i is plus 20i squared. What I tell you to do when you see I squared?
Cross
Cross
the
it
I
off.
squared.
Change the sign. Is this written now the way that it should be?
No.
No. You need to
Standard form.
rewrite it as -20 minus 4i. It has to be written in standard form. The real part first, the imaginary part second. Anybody have any questions so far? We're okay?
I'm still catching up.
What does this mean? Letter E.
Oh, you FOIL it by itself.
Yeah, it just means I have 3 plus 2 i's. So if we FOIL, 3 times 3 is 9. 3 times 2i is 6i.
6I.
2i times 3 is 6i.
6I.
2i times 2i is plus 4i squared. I see an I squared. What do?
Cross out the I, change the sign.
Good. So deal with your reals first. 9 minus 4 is,
5.
and then 6i plus 6i is,
12I.
that's it. Questions?
What was the original? Where the numbers behind the green?
Say that one more time, Annie. 9 minus 4 is 12. 12i. 12i plus 6i is 12. 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 12i plus
What were the numbers behind the green on the right after plus 6i?
It's 9 plus 6i plus 6i plus 4i squared.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
But why did we get rid of the 4i squared?
Because I squared equals -1. So this is saying positive 4 times -1. So you cross off the I squared and change the sign in front of it because 4 times -1 is -4. All right, guys, when I talk about complex conjugates, we've talked about this before, but complex conjugate just means you change the sign in the middle. That's it. Write that down. Change sign in the middle when it's written in standard form. When written in standard form. Meaning, if I had 3 plus 6i, and I said to you, what is the complex conjugate? You guys would tell me it's what? 3 minus 6i. You change just the sign in the middle. If you had -4 minus 5i, the complex conjugate would be -4 plus 5i. You only change the sign in the middle. If you had 6i minus 7, and I said, what's the complex conjugate? What do you have to do first?
You gotta put the 7 in the front.
You gotta say -7 plus 6i, because it has to be written in standard form. And then the complex conjugate would be -7 minus 6i. You only change the sign in the middle. And the reason we do that is so our i's cancel out. And you'll see why in a second. You guys have seen this before, I know. Complex conjugate of 1 plus i is what?
Can you go back?
So when I'm talking here, guys, about the complex conjugate, you told me it would be 1 minus I. So when I FOIL this, 1 times 1 is 1. 1 times -I is -I. I times 1 is I. And I times -I is -I squared. Soon as I see I squared, what do I do?
Cross it out and put -1.
Cross it out and change the
+1.
sign. So this be +1. Guys, what happens here in the middle with my -I and my +I?
They cancel out.
They cancel out. So 1 plus 1 equals 2. Every time you multiply by the complex conjugate, you are eliminating all the i's, and I'll show you why in a second. But what is the complex conjugate of 4 minus 3i?
4 plus
4
3i.
plus 3i.
4 plus 3i. Great. So when I FOIL this, 4 times 4 is 16. 4 times 3i is 12i. -3i and 4 is minus 12i. And -3i and positive 3i is minus 9i squared. I see I squared, what do I do?
Cross out the I.
Cross it out, change the sign.
Change the sign.
So my reals are 16 plus 9, which is?
25.
And then what happens with a positive 12i and a negative 12i?
They cancel out.
They cancel out. So I'm left with 25. Notice when you multiply by the complex conjugate, your middle term will cancel out. And that's very important as we get here to division. Let me do one division problem, and then we'll get to the last slide. So say I have, let's make an example here. 7 plus 6i over 3 minus 2i. Everybody write this down.
Was the last answer 17?
25. 16 and 9. When you have division, guys, no I in denominator. You're not allowed to have an I in the denominator. Just like you can't have 0, just like you can't have a square root. When we have a square root in the denominator, we have to rationalize, right? We have to multiply the top and the bottom by the square root. Well, when you have division, you cannot have an I in the denominator. So we just went through something, and what will cancel our I's is if we multiply by the complex conjugate. So whatever you do to the denominator, you have to do to the numerator. So if I want to get rid of my i's, because you're not allowed to have them in the denominator, I'm going to multiply by the complex conjugate. What's the complex conjugate of 3 minus 2i?
3 plus
3
2i.
plus 2i.
And what you do to the bottom, you do where?
To the top.
So in division, you multiply by the complex conjugate, and then you have two big foiling problems. That's it. I'm going to work with the denominator first. What is 3 times 3?
9.
9.
9.
What is 3 times 2i?
6i.
What's negative 2i times 3?
Negative 6i.
What's negative 2i and negative 2i?
Negative 4i squared.
Yep. I see I squared. What do I do?
Cross it out, make it negative 1, change the sign.
So let's simplify a little more. 9 plus 4 is,
13.
thank you. And what happens with positive 6i and negative 6i?
Cancel
Cancel.
out.
Are my i's out of the denominator?
Yes.
Yes. Every time you multiply by the complex conjugate, like Annie just said, you'll get a real solution. So now we just work with the top. Foil it. 7 times 3 is
21.
21. 7 times 2i.
14i.
6i times 3.
18i.
And then 6i times 2i.
12i.
What?
Squared.
Squared. So what happens when I see I squared?
You cross
Change
out.
the
Cross it out, change the sign. So now I can add my reals. This is gonna the same thing every time, guys. You're gonna cross it out, change the sign, then the numbers on the end you can combine. What's 21 minus 12?
9.
And then what happens with a 14i and an 18i?
They become 32i. No. Wait.
3. Wait, hang on.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, 32i.
And there's your answer.
That's right.
You cannot have an I in the denominator. The way that we get rid of that is we multiply by the complex conjugate, which is exactly what you guys just did. Come back to this when I get to change B to plus, I don't know, let's make it a 4.
Excuse me?
Uh-huh.
We're not doing the previous examples.
No, not right now. Change letter B to plus 4x. Because we're supposed to solve this with complex solutions and B factors. I don't know why they did that. All right, if I look at letter A, guys, we mess this up a lot. A lot of you will look at this and go, oh, it's x plus 2, x minus 2. Or you'll say, oh, it's x plus 2, x plus 2. Guys, x squared plus 4 equals 0 does not factor to the difference of perfect squares. If it did, this would be minus 4 in the middle. This is going to give us a complex solution. Complex means it has an I in it. If I was going to solve this equation, what would I do?
Subtract 4.
Okay, if I subtract 4 from both sides, I get x squared equals negative 4. Now what do?
Square root.
Take the square root of both sides. So x equals, when I physically put the square root on top of a number, plus or minus goes
It's
in
plus
front of
or
my
minus.
answer.
And this will be 2i.
What is the square root of 4? It's 2.
2.
What's the square root of a negative? I.
I.
This is the same thing as saying the square root of 4 times the square root of negative 1. Because we know that the value of the square root of negative 1 is I. And I know that the value of the square root of 4 is 2. If you have a negative underneath your radical, you will have an I in your answer. What this means is when I graph this parabola of x squared plus 4, you guys agree with me this plus 4 is a shift? It's a upwards parabola. Does it cross the x-axis?
No.
No.
No, because it's imaginary.
That's what your imaginary solutions, when they talk about x-intercepts, you guys would say there's none. because they're imaginary. Your solutions are imaginary. You guys need to know that. And again, this is nothing new. This is all stuff that you guys have seen before. 3x squared plus 4x plus 5 equals 0. Okay, first thing you always try and do is what? What's the first thing you always try to do? If I have a quadratic, I know this is a quadratic because it's squared, I'm going to try and factor it because that's the easiest thing to do. I'm going to say, okay, 3 times 5 is 15. What are the factors of 15 that multiply to give me 15 but add to give me 4? Are there any?
No.
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 1 and 15, 3 and 5. So this is where we say, oh man, we got to do the quadratic formula. So my a is 3. The coefficient of x squared is a. The coefficient of x is our b. And the constant is our c. Whatever sign is in front of it goes with it. These all happen to be positive. So we need to remember our quadratic formula is x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, we should know that. If we don't know it, write it down and refer to it. But now we fill in. This is the biggest step, is going from the quadratic formula to filling everything in, because if you miss one negative sign somewhere, the entire problem is wrong. So take your time. Negative b, I have negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b squared. So 4 squared minus 4 times a is 3, c is 5, all over 2 times 3. Check. Did I input everything correctly? Do I have my signs all correct? All that good stuff.
Looks like it.
Okay. This is where you guys need to really check your work and say, okay, do I have everything? If you have a quadratic formula question on your web assign today, this is what I expect to see. Working each problem out so I can see each piece. Now, let's go through and simplify. I have negative 4 plus or minus. What's the 4 squared?
16.
Then I have minus 4 times 3 times 5.
Which is 60.
Okay, 4 times 3 is 12, times 5 is 60, all over 6. Everybody with me?
Yeah.
So I still have negative 4. What's going on with my Apple Pencil here? Plus or minus, what's 60? Sorry, 16 minus 60.
Negative 44.
Negative 44, all over 6. What do you guys notice about the number underneath the radical?
It's imaginary.
It's a negative, it's imaginary. So you need to look at this and you need to say, okay, I have negative 4 plus or minus. I can break this up into negative 1, 4, and 11. The reason I'm breaking it up into all three is because there's pieces to this. 4 is a perfect square. The negative 1 gives me my I. You guys got to pay attention to stuff like this. So when I take out, what is the square root of 4? It's 2.
2.
What's the square root of negative 1?
I.
And then do I know the square root of 11?
No, so it stays under
So it
radical.
just stays under. So I keep simplifying. Negative 4 plus or minus 2i root 11
radical 11
over 6.
Over
over 6.
And then this is where we make silly mistakes. If I were you, I'm just telling you how I would do it to make sure I simplify correctly. I would separate this. I can rewrite this like this, correct?
Mm-hmm.
This way,
Whoa.
what?
Negative 1 times
What does negative 4 over 6 simplify to?
Negative 2/3.
Negative 2/3 plus or minus what?
2i root 11 over 6.
We can
Would the 6
simplify.
cancel out with the 2?
Yeah, that's why I separated it. So it would be I root 11 over 3.
Over
You can
3.
write it that way, or you can write it like this. Negative 2 plus or minus I root 11 over 3, since the denominators stay the same. Either way, I'm not sure how WebAssign's going to want it. So either way works. I'm not exactly sure how WebAssign's going to want it.